We are so thankful again to be with you today, and this morning we're going to be talking about a lot of things pertaining to creation, the fourth commandment, the Sabbath, and the universe. It's a very wide-ranging topic in which we will present part of it here for Sabbath school this morning. Then in essence we're going to continue later on for the church service itself. So yesterday and the day before, we received some questions about the biblical statements there in Genesis 1 and 2 about the earth being without form and void. And people are wondering, what does all this mean? So this morning we're going to take a few minutes and go into this carefully to see if we can understand exactly what's going on. David, what does this say in Genesis 1 and 2?
Verse 1 and 2, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving upon the face of the waters. I think the thing that we want to try to bring out here is that the very first part of the first day was evening, right? Because all of the biblical creation days, they started with the evening and ended with the morning, and the evening and the morning were the first day, the second day, and so forth. The Sabbath began with the evening. So it's interesting to note that when God created the earth on day one, the earth was without form and void during the darkness portion of the first day. In fact, I think it was probably during that first day, the darkness portion, which God actually spoke the matter of the earth into existence. And at the time He spoke it into existence, yes, it's true, the earth was without form and void, because He hadn't completed the creation. Just because He spoke the matter into existence on day one doesn't mean that it instantaneously attained to the form that it was at the end of day 6. That's what all the other days of creation were for, to perfect what He had called into existence on day 1.
David, isn't it true that indeed God could have called into existence the universe, for example, the earth right now, the earth in a form that existed at the end of day 6. He could have done that instantly on day 1. But He chose to spread this work out, and as we understand it, He spread it out because He was going to then initiate the seventh-day Sabbath. Let's just focus on that for a moment. Was there a Sabbath before creation week?
No.
No, because what it says, 6 days, and then the seventh-day Sabbath. So for eternity past, before creation week, there was no Sabbath. Now, let's focus on this also briefly just for a few minutes this morning. The world or the universe before creation week, until the time there was sin entered into heaven by Lucifer rebelling, everybody had access to what? To God almost directly, in a sense. And so it was perfection everywhere. There was no needed for a special time set apart to keep holy, because everything in the universe was, in a sense, holy. And so this is a new creation here that we're talking about as far as this earth is concerned, and us as human beings. So we want to keep that in mind as we continue to focus attention on this particular topic. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to take this slowly. In the beginning and the foundations of the earth.
We mentioned Thursday night, of course, that we tried to link the relationship between the phrase "in the beginning" and found in Genesis 1:1 to Jesus' own use of the term "in the beginning" or "from the beginning" in Mark 10, verse 6. When Jesus answered in Mark 10, verse 6, "But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." That indicates, in our way of thinking, that Jesus was trying to show the scribes and the Pharisees at that point that creation, from its very beginning, had a reference to the creation of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, of course, were created during creation week. And from the beginning of creation links the in the beginning of Genesis 1:1 to creation week. So there was no large gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. People often ask, well, why isn't it possible that God could have created the earth instantly 4.5 billion years ago? Why is that not possible? Well, it's not a matter of that it's not possible. Of course that's possible, if it was true. The problem is it's not true. The reason why it's not true is because why would you invent a 4.5 billion year gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2? There's no scientific reason why you would do that. We just showed last night when we looked at the evidence of the helium retention in the zircons contained within the granites, which are the foundation rocks. The Bible specifically mentioned God created the foundations of the earth. That line of reasoning doesn't seem to make any sense. The only reason I can think of that somebody would want to put 4.5 billion years between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2 is to satisfy one thing, and that is popular science's contention that the earth is definitely 4.5 billion years old. In other words, we're going to come the direction of the scientists a little bit and say, okay, you've gotten so much evidence that the earth is old, we'll come your direction and say, yeah, we believe the earth is billions of years old too. We're just going to say that God created it instantly 4.5 billion years ago. But you know what? The Bible really just doesn't support that. And honestly, science doesn't support it either. So we don't really have any support for it. The only real support we have for it, and this is a powerful reason, by the way, is an emotional support. We emotionally want to fit in with what the scientists of the world say. They say we're crazy unless we believe the earth is 4.5 billion years old. Nobody wants to stand out like they're crazy. So they're going to invent a theology that makes us compatible with what the world says. And you know what? We don't have to do that. There's no scientific reason why we have to agree with the scientists of the world. What are they using? By the way, this is just it's an interesting sidelight here. What are the scientists of the world using to come to the conclusion that the earth really is 4.5 billion years? Well, let me tell you, do you think they're going to Genesis 1:1 and looking at Genesis 1:1 and 1:2? No. They don't know anything about Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. They don't know anything about your explanation that there's 4.5 billion years between those two verses. They would laugh if they even knew that we believed that way or that some of us believed that way. The thing they go to is the radiometric dating techniques, which we've been talking about Thursday night and last night. The radiometric dating techniques to them represent an infallible dating proof that the earth is billions of years old. But the problem is, if you have the assumptions built into radiometric dating techniques don't hold water. The uniformitarian principle that holds the whole thing together is not really something that has ever been tested scientifically. Not only that, but it doesn't jive with the polonium halo data. Not only that, but it doesn't jive with the helium retention in the zircons. And so all we're left with is the theological argument now. Well, you know what? It does say the earth was without form and void. So I wonder if that means the earth was 4.5 billion years old when it was created, or when God came along and made Adam and Eve. I don't see it. I cannot be convinced of it. I've never heard one person yet even give me the slightest indication that that line of reasoning makes any sense whatsoever. I will tell you one more thing before I let Dad finish here, and that is, if you go out into the world, if you go out to the evangelical world or anybody else that believes in the Bible, you won't hear this theory that the earth is ancient, but that life on earth is young. I've never heard it anywhere else but within the Adventist church. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that's just my own personal experience.
David, what you've said reminds me of an article, opinion article that appeared in USA Today just a couple of months ago. It was written by two scientist-type theologians at a very prominent fundamentalist Christian college, not a Seventh-day Adventist college, but they were focusing on this particular issue, and they were bringing out to the public all over the world, through USA Today, widely read, of course, that indeed these people who believe, the earth is only about several thousand years old, they're really off scientifically. They don't really know what's going on. And these now are people at this very fundamentalist Christian college telling the world that indeed the earth is really several billion years old. And you don't have to worry about separating this or that or the other. In the beginning, as far as they're concerned, can put it back 4.5 billion years. So it has become pervasive, not only in the world, but now it is getting more and more pervasive within the Christian church. And we're going to find, as you have been saying here, that in the process of doing this, you destroy, what do you destroy? The days of creation are no longer days of creation of 24-hour length. Let's look at the next one here. In the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Again, we want to make sure we understand, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. From the beginning, he made them male and female. That establishes in the beginning at the time of male and female. Now, on the basis of what you were saying just then, so anyone who wants to put things back in the beginning back several billion years, they got to put Adam and Eve back at that time. Then you've got full-blown evolution.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
I can tell you one thing right now. If you accept a billions of year age of the earth, you accept the radiometric dating techniques that support that. And then if you want to accept those radiometric dating techniques, you've got to accept them in every scenario where they're used. That's only logical, right? If you accept the billions of year age of the earth, you've got to accept the dating techniques that support that, right? I mean, that's why we believe it, right? So it's interesting to note that the same dating techniques that are used to establish the multi-billion year age of the earth are the exact same dating techniques that the scientists use to date the fossiliferous rocks containing the fossils. Then you have to invent some kind of scenario where death existed before creation week. And believe it or not, a lot of people believe that. Why? Because it makes, that's the only logical conclusion they can come to based on the assumptions that they have adopted. But the problem is that the Bible nowhere supports life before creation week. So you can't get that from the Bible. You have to create a wildly ad hoc theory to even begin to accept a multi-billion year age of the earth, and then not accept ancient age of life. So I just want to warn you, you're going, if you want to believe that, it's fine, but you're going to dig yourself into an extremely large, illogical hole that's easily shot at, not only by a creationist who believes in a young earth, but it's easily shot out by an evolutionist who truly believes in evolution, because they are not going to accept any model of your story which says that the earth was instantaneously created 4.5 billion years ago. That doesn't make any scientific sense to them whatsoever. So I would just submit, why don't we consider adopting a model of earth origin which follows as closely the Bible record as we can possibly follow it, and at the same time agrees with the scientific data that exists that we have presented to you Thursday night and Friday night, the polonium halos specifically, and the helium retention in the zircons.
David, as I mentioned last night to the audience here, I was at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory as a guest scientist there for 13 years. There were people there, atheists, agnostics, of all religious persuasions, and they understood what I believed. And it was that indeed the earth itself was basically called into existence. They saw that in the papers that were being published there in the scientific journals. They would have laughed me out of the laboratory if indeed I had come along and said, well, look, guys, I can believe the earth is billions of years old, and then there was a reconstruction period, cultivation of a garden period by God just 6,000 years ago. I would have been kicked out of the laboratory. The people who are in science, who are saying this about the ancient earth and then reconstruction 6,000 years ago, are not scientists who are out doing work in the scientific community. The scientific community, if you go out and start saying this, you'll be laughed off the block. I continue to present papers, scientific papers, at the American Physical Society meetings here almost yearly, and present all this material directly. But indeed, if I were to go and make this kind of contradiction that we're talking about here, I would be laughed out of the room to begin with. And I'm not laughed out of the room when I make these presentations. Let's continue. So in the beginning, Adam and Eve, in the beginning, the foundations of the earth. So the foundations of the earth then were made in the beginning at the time that Adam and Eve were made. El Capitan is one of the foundations of the earth. We saw that yesterday. And the polonium halos, the primordial polonium halos there with only a 3-minute half-life, they tell us, the lower schematic there tells us, they demand that indeed their short half-life, like putting an Alka-Seltzer in a glass of water and it fizzing just for a short period of time, if you don't freeze it instantly to capture those bubbles, the bubbles are going to disappear. Well, what we're seeing here, and that halo, that very halo formed from very, very short half-life radioactivity, same thing. The granite was created, the radioactivity was put there in the little speck. It began to explode, so to speak, the particles did, and then develop the halo. The granite had to be around the speck of polonium instantly, or the polonium would have disappeared in a very, very short period of time, and there would have been no halo. So, granite rocks, foundations of the earth, and the polonium halos. Now, in the beginning, without form and void, this is what we've been talking about, the foundations of the earth, Adam and Eve, we've just talked about that, and the morning stars and the sons of God sang together. Well, let's continue. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's look at it carefully. Reason together, the Bible says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was moving upon the face of the waters. God said, let there be light. There was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Which came first? The light.
Darkness.
The darkness came first. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. Evening and morning one day. The darkness then of that first day was the night of the first day, and the light, of course, after that was the morning of the first day, which is what you've just got through saying. Let's let you continue now with this line of reasoning.
And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was an evening, and there was morning, one day. Genesis.
David, let me just say to the audience, the reason we're going over this carefully is because we have received several inquiries about this particular topic. And we want to cover it, and then now covering it again with these biblical passages to help us all understand the nature of the truth of the Bible. Go ahead.
So the darkness of verse 2 was the evening of day 1. The same verse, the time the earth was without form and void, that was the time of darkness. This is why the evening part of the seventh-day Sabbath is the same time period as the darkness period of day 1. It's the first part of the day. The first part of the day in each creation day is the darkness or the evening portion.
David, let's think about this with the audience here. If indeed someone said, the earth was here billions and billions of years, that was dark, right? Because God said the light didn't come till much, much, much later. So it was in darkness then for what? How long?
Billions of years.
Billions of years. Billions of years. Well, you see, that had to be, according to the Bible, the darkness, and then the light. That means the darkness part of the first day was 4.5 billion years long. You see what kind of logical contradictions immediately come into the picture by making the earth several billion years old, sitting out in darkness. And again, let me go back to this just a second. We all want to understand the last part. The evening part of the seventh-day Sabbath then is the same time period as the dark period of day 1. And then the darkness, the second paragraph of verse 2, was the evening of day 1. In that same verse, the time the earth was without form and void was the time of darkness. So this time of darkness we're talking about here, the earth was without form and void. How long? Just that darkness period which preceded the light. Normally, of course, that would be about 12 hours. That's all. The period of darkness, God was in the process of making the earth, creating the earth, just like a very poor analogy would be if someone is making a loaf of bread, a lady is making a loaf of bread, and the bread then is in the dough stage until, of course, it's put in the oven and finalized as a loaf of bread. So it was only in that first 12-hour period, the night period, in a sense, that it was without form and void. Because at the very end of it, it says that indeed the Spirit of God moved upon the surface of the waters. So now we go to Job 38, verse 4, verses 6 and 7. Where were you, God is asking Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Remember, we found out the foundations of the earth are the granite rocks. And on what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Here we have introduced in the book of Job, God telling us there were witnesses to the creation of the earth. There were witnesses to the creation of the earth. Our earth and the people on it, ourselves, Adam and Eve and so forth, were a new, brand new creation, and there were those in heaven who were witnessing it, and it says the morning stars sang together. What are the morning stars? Well, biblically, of course, that would be the angels, the good angels, the unfallen angels, the loyal angels, where they're witnessing God's creation of our earth and everything on it. Then it says all the sons of God shouted for joy. David, let's think about this just for a moment. Jesus came to this world and he said he was the Son of God. Then if we go to another part of Job, we find that there was a conference called one day in heaven, and it said the sons of God had come to this particular conference in heaven. Who else did it say, if you remember, was also going to wanted to come to that big conference in heaven?
Satan.
Satan himself. The fallen Lucifer was there. He wanted to get in on the act. Now, interestingly, because you and I are acquainted with the Bible and history and so forth, we found now before Lucifer sinned against God and was cast out of heaven, let's think about this. Why would he want to go back to that conference when all the sons of God and so forth and all the people from the unfallen worlds gathered at that particular conference? Could you think he might have said, look, God, there's my place up there. I don't think he was allowed to get back in, but he could have said, I had a place in that conference. How about letting me back in? I want to get back in. But he wasn't. He wasn't allowed, I don't think, at all to get back in. But it was very clear, of course, Lucifer wanted to get back in that particular conference. So the sons of God, we believe, are those leaders, so to speak, the representatives of the unfallen worlds, which are still unfallen as far as we know. And the morning stars are the angels, the good, loyal angels. After, the Bible says, indeed, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and they were, cast out. And their place was found no more in heaven. Now, to me, that means Lucifer has never gotten back. Neither have any of the evil angels ever gotten back in. They were all cast out because they had decided to sin against God. Now, this means that, of course, the sons of God, the representatives of these unfallen worlds, were allowed to go to this conference I spoke about there in the book of Job. They were there. They had a right to be there because they were unfallen. They were the representatives of the unfallen worlds that they represented at that particular time. And of course, the angels of heaven were pure and holy, the ones that had remained faithful. So this is giving us an insight that indeed, when we're talking about Genesis 1:1, 1:2, and 1:3, 4, 5, and so forth, we're talking about what the Bible is telling us about the creation, age of the earth, and what's happened on this earth primarily. But it does give us some insights as to what's going on in the universe, as we'll see in the next slide. David, tell us a little bit about these unusual verses. At least to me, they were unusual when we first saw them.
Yeah, the little background on these verses right here is that a lot of people, too, get very tripped up on the idea that we say that during day 4 of creation week that God created the sun and the moon. He made the stars also. A lot of people strenuously object to this, saying there's no way God could have made all that in day 4. Well, yes, he could have. I don't know how else to say it, let me just give a little warning here. Don't get too attached to the theory of evolution, okay? Try not to get too attached to it. I'm going to speak just to the Adventist in the audience here. Maybe there's some non-Adventists here, but just to the Adventist, I want to say this. Use the same skepticism you had for Sunday sacredness for evolution. 99% of the Christian world worships on Sunday. Why don't you? Why don't you? Use that same skepticism for evolution. Just because the world accepts evolution doesn't mean you have to accept it. And by the way, there's not really good scientific evidence that supports it, because if you really look at the foundations of the assumptions used in radiometric dating, they don't hold the water that you might think that they do. And just think, we just talked about on Thursday night how for thousands of years the world believed that the earth was the center of the solar system. The sun rotated around the earth and all of that. And it was never challenged. Copernicus finally challenged it, and he was ostracized. Don't be caught believing a wrong thing. People will come up to me all the time and they'll say, you know what? It doesn't make any difference really when God created the earth. As long as I believe in Jesus, that's really all that matters. That's the exact same argument that somebody comes up to me that I'm talking to about the seventh-day Sabbath, and they say, you know what? It doesn't really matter what day you keep for Sabbath. Whether it's the Sunday or whether it's Saturday, it doesn't matter. All you need to do, the principle behind it is you need to keep a day holy. Well, I beg to differ. God is a God of order. God is a God who means what he says. If he didn't mean what he said, then he would have accepted Cain's offering, right? Cain's offering was beautiful, had all these nice fruits and everything. What was really wrong with Cain's offering? That was his occupation, tiller of the ground. Why didn't God accept that? That was his labor that he was trying to bring to God. The only small problem was that's not what God said to do. So you have to, when you think about what we're believing in the Bible, it's important to believe what the Bible says because that's what it says. In Psalm 68, there's a reference to the ancient heavens. So this is the answer that I have for people that say, it's impossible for God to have created the stars on day 4 of creation week because there was other things in existence prior to creation week. We know that. There were unfallen worlds, et cetera, et cetera. Heaven existed. And I agree with that. Heaven did exist. There were unfallen worlds or, all of these things. Yes. But were they a part of our particular universe? That's the thing that you haven't established. That's the thing that I would like to say the Bible speaks of when it talks here in Psalm 68. It says, "Sing to God, O kingdoms of the earth, sing praises to the Lord, to him who rides in the heavens, the ancient heavens." I think the Bible differentiates between the created universe that was relatively just recently created and the ancient heavens, the heavens where heaven has existed forever, where the other worlds are. Where's that? I don't know. Is it in another dimension? I don't know. All I know is that when God said he created the stars on day 4, why not believe it? It's not that hard. People say it's impossible because there's billions of light years from here to the nearest, to some of the farthest stars. There's no way God could have created stars that far away so that we could see them now. No way. All I can say is don't limit God in his own creation. I would just submit to you that at least consider the idea that when the Bible talks here of, and here it is in Psalm 68, again from the New American Standard, "Sing to God, O kings of the earth, sing praises to him who rides upon the highest heavens, which are from ancient times."
We're going to see a little bit more about the highest heavens and the ancient heavens here shortly. Maybe we'll go ahead and catch the next one. Basically what this is saying, and we won't try to read it, we've come to a place where there's going to be a paradigm shift sooner or later in what we're telling you, but now we want to go to a paradigm shift, something you haven't heard about, something the evolutionists are basically trying to keep from you, what we've been telling you here the last couple of days, and now there's something else which they could have brought out very, very prominently over the last 50 years, and look at this. The Bible says, we believe it all, there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. How many here would believe that indeed the bones of giants, similar to what the Bible is talking about, have already been discovered? Well, they have, and they were very prominently presented to the world back in 1946 and 48, and guess what? Then they were buried. The evolutionists wanted to bury them out of sight. Oldest human bones arrive in the United States And the date there is in Life magazine, October 7, 1946. Very, very prominently displayed in Life magazine of that issue. Again, Life magazine, big spread inside. New giant appears on man's family tree. What is that? What do the bones look like? This is the fragment now. This is an artist's sketch now of exactly what is in Life magazine. I could not actually scan it and bring it here because of a copyright situation, but that's a very accurate sketch of exactly what's in that particular page of Life magazine. 1946, 1948, this is the 46th one. Here now is a comparison, and these are sketches, very accurate sketches of exactly what is in these issues of Life magazine.
The modern jawbone is there on the left, and the giant's portion of his mandible there is on the right. The thing that, for those of you who want to see the original articles in Life magazine, you can go to archived sources of magazines like Life, and you can actually order these issues. They charge like $25 or something to get these issues from the 1940s, but they sell them. The antiques dealers sell them, and we actually bought some. And the original articles are very fascinating, where they show the pictures of these fossils, because people sometimes say, we believe that there were giants before the flood. Where are they? You see the dinosaurs buried in the mud. Where are the giant humans? That's what we really want to see. We want to see some giant humans. And I do too. But these little fragments that have been found are just like a little taste of what's there. I think that they're there. I think that God has His hand over what is being discovered at this particular time. Whether or not He chooses to reveal more as time approaches the end or not, I don't know. But,
You can't deny the fact that these are...
Whether or not you believe anything like that's coming or not, this has been found.
This is now what was stated there in Life magazine. This is Dr. Ralph von Koningswald, the archaeologist, paleontologist who actually found them. And that again is a very accurate sketch of a picture there in Life magazine holding up the mandible and, of course, the molars, looking at it. And what do we have in terms of, there it is. He holds a normal tooth. He holds, of course, right adjacent to it, the giant molar. These were fragments of giants, no question about it, who lived before the flood. Now this is the sketch now in Life magazine. The giant, this huge giant that fit, of course, this jawbone was pictured there, so to speak. It was an artist's sketch there in Life magazine as to what he might look like. Well, you can imagine, of course, coming from an evolutionist perspective, he's going to make him look like an ape. They didn't know that at all. But anyway, and then of course you have the normal size ancient man, so to speak, over there on the right. And you can see large differences, twice as large. And here in Life magazine now you can see the actual middle man there, the big man, is this Gigantopithecus and calls other things. And there again to the left, of course, is modern man, and then the various other presumed men that lived in days gone by. So you've got someone there, they've got bones, fragments, and the paleontologists who are evolutionists are themselves saying, looks like this is what we've got as our ancestry. But it says they can't fit it on man's family tree. They look back and they say, where do these fit? Man is supposed to be coming up. And we don't have any giants millions of years old in our family tree. So guess what they've done? They buried it. You will not find any scientific article, hardly at all, about these discoveries since the last 60 years. They don't want you to know that indeed how seriously this questions the whole theory of evolution. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, the following photographs. Photographs are the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula. The genuine Mount Sinai is somewhere among them. The rocks there are very similar to El Capitan. They're a little different color. So the 10 Commandments then were inscribed on the granite rocks like those in the following photo. These are now, this is sun rising over the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula. And here's more of them. Different view. The mountains of the Sinai Peninsula. The real, genuine Mount Sinai is somewhere among them. I've looked into this, and as of right now, there's no general agreement as to which other one of these mountains was the actual Mount Sinai. I have a good friend who says he thinks he knows, and I haven't decided to go over there to look at it myself as yet, but he has convinced me he has good evidence for this genuine Mount Sinai. Now, what we do know is this is what is called Mount Sinai and has been called Mount Sinai for a long period of time. Now, in the lower right-hand portion of that figure, this photograph, is this St. Catherine's Monastery. So the Catholics have been there at the base of this particular mountain for a long, long period of time and have given credence to the idea, that this is really the genuine Mount Sinai. I personally doubt that very, very seriously. But what we do know is that the Mount Sinai granite, with the Mount Sinai rock, all the Mount Sinai Peninsula is composed of granitic rock. Similar to the granitic rock, of course, of El Capitan, except it's got a larger number of the darker minerals, reddish minerals in it. And so, previously we showed that God left an end-time message of instant creation in this type of rock, the granites, to scientifically affirm He is the creator of the universe, that the Genesis 6-day creation account is scientifically accurate, and the seventh day is the Sabbath of creation. Now, after microscopically examining these granite rocks from Mount Sinai, we find they too contain these creation polonium halos. Is that a surprise? Remember, we've told you up until now, these polonium creation halos are in granites all over the world. So I had a friend at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem who was in the physics department at the Rockeye Institute, and I asked him to see if he would obtain a piece of the Sinai granite, what we just saw a picture of a few minutes ago. He had a good friend there in the geology department at the Hebrew University, and he got a piece of that Sinai granite, not recently, but earlier, and he sent it to me. And as a result of that, there it is. There is a chunk of that Mount Sinai granite that we referred to just a few minutes ago. And I've taken the little black specks from this piece of granite, looked at them under the microscope, and found these creation halos, like we're talking about here. So again, we have now creation here in Mount El Capitan, creation here, written in the rocks of Mount Sinai itself. And again, the emphasis is here, creation, 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 instant creation of God in the foundations rocks of this earth. David, we've said this, we talked about this particular slide before, and would you sort of focus on it and tell us something about this finger coming down to the rock there? What significance are we going to draw from that in just a minute?
Well, there's very few things in the Bible that God actually writes with His own finger. You can just think of a very few examples in the Bible where that actually happens. But one of them, of course, is when He writes with His own finger in the tables of stone that He gives to Moses. And in that, where He writes with His own finger, I made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. God wrote that. I did this. And I did it in 6 days. So I think that, we really, if there was ever any part of the Bible that you would want to study very closely, it would be the part where God actually wrote something out with His finger and said, okay, this is truth. You can't really mess that up no matter how you try. The earth really was created by God in 6 days. And to play games with how much of the earth was created in 6 days is exactly that. It's just playing games. Let's not play games, let's just believe it.
David, in the context of this particular slide, and of course the finger coming down and writing the Ten Commandments there, if God really wanted to help us all to understand very clearly, we believe God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. It says, the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and rest, and so forth. But now we want to find out. Indeed, it says He wrote. God wrote. This is one of the few times, as David has said, in the Bible where, it says God wrote. But now this is on tables of stone that He's going to give to Moses. and give to the children of Israel, put them in the Ark of the Covenant, and last, in a sense, for the duration of Earth history. Of course, we know that something happened, that indeed they rebelled, and of course he had to make another set. He had to write another set. But for right now, we're going to focus on what it says about Exodus 31:18, David. What does it say?
And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God.
Now, David, when it says he gave unto Moses, who are we talking about?
God.
Okay. 2 tables of stone, written with the finger. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting at all? That we write, basically with our hands, with our fingers, and now it's saying in the Bible, written with the finger of God. Doesn't that imply someone like us is doing the writing? Who came to this world from the Godhead as a man? Jesus Christ. But we can't just infer that. Let's go on and see. So who does that finger belong to?
Exodus 3:13 and 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you.
So the I am that had led Israel out of Egypt was there at Mount Sinai. And the I am, who in the Godhead is called the I am in particular? Well, we're going to go over to John the 8th chapter and find out. Go ahead.
This is Jesus talking, of course, to the scribes and Pharisees when they were quizzing him. And Jesus gets very direct with them. And he says, Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am.
And the Bible right after that says, I believe it says, they took up stones to stone him. Why? Because he had identified himself as the I am that had spoken to Moses. The I am who had led Israel out of Egypt, there and going into Canaan, on the way to Canaan. And so we've got proof, absolute proof, that it was Jesus Christ himself who wrote those 10 commandments on those tables of stone on Mount Sinai and gave them to him, to Moses, to the world. And that was one of the things that impressed me, which I sort of mentioned the other night. I did not grow up as a Seventh-day Adventist, became an evolutionist big time, as I mentioned the other night. And it was after I began to restudy the Bible and heard an evangelist and went to an evangelistic series of meetings from a Seventh-day Adventist minister. And I was still confused over this whole issue, so to speak, of Sunday and Sabbath. What day was it really, and so forth. So he came over, and I heard him speak in an evangelistic meeting, and I wanted to follow up exactly, make sure I understood exactly what he was saying, and I focused on the 4th commandment. And this issue of 4 and 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. The 6 days and the 7th day, as I talked to him, the 7th day was 24 hours, because everybody who was a Sabbath keeper at that time, the Jews I knew, was only 24 hours. So how could it be that 6 days were going to be anything more than 24 hours? And so as I spoke to him about this, that was one thing that convinced me to keep on studying, because I was still very heavily into evolution at that time, but I recognized that indeed, if God had put something that specific in giving those commandments to Moses, and he wrote it with his own finger, and that finger belonged to Jesus Christ himself, here I was, am I going to question Jesus Christ, what he wrote, and what he gave to Moses, or am I going to believe in my evolutionary perspective? That's what caused me and my wife many, many years ago to dedicate our lives to try to find out the scientific truth. Because as I've indicated to you, I went to the university and studied and studied and studied. I learned what they told me was truth. But we decided to go find out the truth for ourselves with God's great blessing. So Jesus, the great I am, is the one who wrote those 10 commandments. And after he wrote those 10 commandments, what did the Bible say should be done with the 10 commandments? What did Moses do?
Put them in the Ark of the Covenant. And then that, of course, was placed in the most holy place of the earthly tabernacle.
That is simply a representation, of course, of the tabernacle in the wilderness. We remember on the left side, of course, was the holy place of the earthly tabernacle, and beyond that veil there, so to speak, was the most holy place. And that's where the Ark of the Covenant was located. And that bright light there above the Ark of the Covenant, as we all know from the Bible, was the Shekinah. That was God's visible presence right there above the Ark of the Covenant, right there above the Ten Commandments. So just think about this. You know that the law God gave to Moses said, if anyone goes in and tries to get close to the Ark of the Covenant, who is not a priest and authorized to do that, what's going to happen?
They will be killed.
They would be killed. And so what we're saying is, you know, God made it very, very specific, the sacredness of these Ten Commandments, His glory right there, making it impossible to go in. Suppose somebody said one day, you know, I don't like what God has written in those Ten Commandments. So just for the sake of argument, you know, we're going to say they got a band of Israelites or a band of marauders, you know, Syrians or whatever, and they're going to come in. They're going to go in there and take this Ark of the Covenant, and they're going to take the top off and take those tablets out, and they're going to write something different. You know, they don't like the commandment, for example, about stealing or lying or cheating or adultery or whatever. They're going to change those commandments and then put them back in the Ark of the Covenant. How far would they have gotten?
Not too far.
They would have been zapped even before they got in the door, so to speak. So basically, you know, what occurred to me after a while was, in essence, if I thought I had the ability to go in and make a modification as to what the fourth commandment said about keeping the fourth commandment holy and about it being a representative, the Sabbath being a representative day memorial of creation, wasn't I, in a sense, trying to do the same thing, go into the Ark of the Covenant, take the commandment, rewrite it, put it back? I thought, wait a minute. I really have got to study to find out what the science is all about. Because this was, as far as we were concerned, my wife and I were concerned, this was a life and death matter. This was a matter of learning the truth for ourselves. Biblical truth was there. But we believed that indeed, we still believe honestly, of course you know that now, that the God that we serve, the God who created the universe, created us, Adam and Eve, and everything else, is a God of truth. And He's not going to tell us one thing in the Bible and put something else here in the earth to try to confuse the picture. Now, that's not to say, of course, there isn't confusion out here. But we understand that there was an enemy. The greatest angel in heaven fell. He was cast into the earth. And He's been working very, very hard in the last many 6,000 years, we'll say, to try to draw individuals, people like ourselves, off track and to help them to deceive them to believe that what God wrote with His own finger really isn't true. I know I was deceived for a long period of time, going out and telling people about evolution and everything. But anyway, Pat and I asked the Lord to lead and guide many, many years ago is when we started, and slowly. And one of the first things the Lord revealed, and I have never had a vision, I've never had any voices speaking to me. When I say God revealed or help me to understand, what I mean is I worked and did everything on my part. But there was a time, many years ago now, when I was looking at these polonium halos under the microscope, and I didn't have any idea in this world what the answer was, because I was still so much a part of evolution that when I looked at those little creation halos under the microscope, only thing I could think of was, how in the world can I fit this into this long period of Earth's evolution? The granite's cooling deep underground over a long, long period of time. The people who had seen them before I came along, the investigators, they couldn't figure it out. They said, this is really something unusual. You know, what are we going to do about it? Well, I couldn't figure it out either. Until one day, in looking under the microscope at a whole group of those polonium halos, guess what happened? A couple of biblical verses flashed in my mind. By the word of the Lord, Psalm 33, 6 and 9, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of His mouth. For He spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, God had left His fingerprints of creation in those rocks, the granite rocks. That was a long time ago. That was 1965, in fact.
And just say that after he joined the church and began to publicize within the church the findings for creation and the evidence for creation, some very influential voices within the church pulled him aside and said, you know what, you need to pipe down a little bit because you can't be sure about what you're talking about. And so that's what led him on the long odyssey of publishing the scientific papers, because they pulled him aside and they said, look, man, you're brand new in this church, you know, you're too excited. And we've already established here that the earth is billions of years old, so don't come in here and mess things up by saying that the earth is really young. So that's what started the research project, to very slow, methodical publishing paper after paper after paper within the world's most prestigious scientific journals, documenting the evidence which we spent last night and the night before trying to explain. And in the process of doing that, not destroying his first belief that maybe God really did call the earth into existence and that the earth probably is young, but instead supported that view. But the voices who pulled him aside initially and said, beware, you know, you're treading on ground which we've already decided upon here. We've already decided that the earth is old, and you're not going to change things, essentially, is what was said. And we don't need to talk about who said that or anything else, but the point is that some very influential and powerful voices still believe very firmly in an ancient age of the earth, and in essence, another faction of people actually believe in evolution itself. And that's ultimately where this whole thing leads. You can believe in an ancient age of the earth, but sooner or later you wake up one day and you think to yourself, that doesn't make any sense either. I might as well just believe in evolution, which is what a lot of people end up doing anyway. So the research project, which spanned all these years, did in fact uncover evidence which further supported a belief in the literal creation of the earth. But that doesn't mean that there weren't voices that said, no, 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 you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And sometimes your most critical voices are the voices of your friends. So I think it's important to realize that whenever you're looking into these issues, you have to think for yourself. Yeah, I'm up here trying to tell you how to think, right? When I tell you, and then I'm saying think for yourself. Well, I'm not taking your ability, I'm not trying to take away your right to think for yourself. I just want to make sure that when you leave here, you understand that there's just as powerful an argument to believe in a young age of the earth as your belief in an ancient age of the earth, if that's the way you believe. And I can promise you that don't become too attached to that viewpoint. And I'll try not to become too attached to mine, although I can already promise you I'm pretty attached to it.
David, you just mentioned, of course, that when we got started, there were voices telling me, give up, you know, you're down a blind alley and so forth, but we continued. And after we had that experience, as I mentioned, this not voice, but the thoughts flashed to my mind about that Bible verse. I did mention this to other people, and they said, as you say, of course, no, man, you're too excited, this isn't it. So immediately at that point in time, I decided that indeed the only way this would ever get out to the world would be to go to some national laboratory of some kind, do this work, and provide all the experimental evidence year after year and so forth. I didn't have any hope of ever doing that, realistically, humanly speaking, but we began to pray. And the God of heaven opened the door for us to go to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for that 1 year, 2 years, and they extended it to that 13th year. Now, when I was in Washington, from the laboratory, I went up to D.C. from time to time, and I would talk to various prominent scientists up there and others about this discoveries I made. Scientific American, everybody knows about Scientific American. Well, when I went to the laboratory, the editor of Scientific American, name was Flanagan, Dennis Flanagan at that particular time, heard about what I had found. And he said, I want you to write an article for me for Scientific American. In fact, he paid me $500 for it. I wrote the article, and guess what I said? I got almost close, very, very close, of course, to telling exactly what the implications are, and sent it in to Dennis Flanagan. And guess when it came out? It didn't.
Never.
Years have passed now, 30 or more years have passed now, and it was never published. Dennis Flanagan saw it, and he saw there was more there than he wanted. He just never published it. He didn't sell me, he just dropped it. Then another incident, I was in Washington, D.C., and I said, well, to myself, I went to the corresponding secretary of the American Chemical Society, Wallace Brody, because a person I had met years earlier up at Walla Walla College. Went to see him, and I told him, basically, I described what I'd found, the polonium halos and so forth, and he looked at me and he said, I know what you're talking about. He said, when I was in Germany, he said, as a young man, I would go to the mines there in Germany. There are the huge crystals of salt. And he said, and calcite. And he said, what you can see in these huge clear crystals, just like glass, huge crystals, you can see, it says there's in the crystal itself a huge mass, like someone took a bottle of India ink and poured it into a glass of syrup. And the India ink was simply diffusing slowly, and then boom, it was stopped. He said, I've always wondered what was going on. In other words, he had the idea from another phenomenon there in the salt mines there in Germany, calcite, that I was telling him about with respect to the polonium halos. And he said, where have you published this? And I said, well, this is what I'm working on. I realize, I need to get it out to the world. And he said, you do need to get it out. You need to send it to Science, one of the most prominent scientific journals in the world. And so I went back and started, of course, working to that end to get it all published and ready for Science, part of which I told you about a little bit last night. Then I also went to one of the editors I went to National Geographic, and I tried to get to the editor himself to tell about this, because I thought, this would be an ideal thing for National Geographic to bring out. They're always bringing out evolution this and evolution this and this. So I got in touch with and actually met with, that day, one of the associate editors of National Geographic. And he sat there and he listened to me, basically what was going on. And at the end of it he said, I'll tell you what, you got something that's too much. We take people and they move them, 1 inch. You've got something that's out in space. He said, we can't take it. So we're going to pick up on taking the Ark of the Covenant from the earthly tabernacle to the universe. We're going to find some really exciting implications when we do this. So right now we're going to close up shop for just a little while, but we'll be back shortly and pick everything up for the Sabbath hour. Thanks so much.